Good morning, good evening, whenever you are tuning in. This is Preston Smith, editor-in-chief of The Corners magazine. Talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Also, your detective, I hope, in Central Europe with CDDI. And today is one more episode of The Three Things. Now, I've got a lot in store for you today. I'll tell you what's coming up. But we got a few things to talk about before we get there. But our three things for this episode. Well, yes, by popular demand, what am I going to say? I told you this is not going to be the war in Ukraine show, but we are going to have a segment on the war in Ukraine, and we're going to have actually two segments on the war in Ukraine, because in part two, we're actually going to meet with a friend of mine. His name is Michael Houlehan. He is the president and founder of Aspen Aid, which has been getting all kinds of aid into Ukraine. I know he founded that organization when he saw what was going on with the invasion. And he happens to be passing through Warsaw, and he has spent quite a bit of time in Ukraine. He's been to the front. I've got a lot of questions for him, so forgive me. I know I said we're going to get into surveillance and some of the detective themes and also some other true crime, but one more episode. This is too interesting for me to skip. So in part two, thing two, it's going to be Mr. Houlehan. In thing three, we're going to do a war in Ukraine update. But thing one, we're going to talk about Alexei Navalny. That's right, Navalny, who was handed a 19-year prison sentence, which is a travesty no matter what you think about him. And we're going to talk about some of I'm not going to sit here and say that somebody's a saint when we're not. We're going to talk about that in depth. But before we get to any of the things, I've got a few other things to talk about. And we have letters. Actually, we had letters previously. I kind of skipped them. And you know, some of you are asking already, well, how do I write a letter? Well, guys, come on, get on the website. The website is www.thecorners.pl. And on the website, you will find this magazine. Now, if you open the website, you'll see, this is Cocaine, the Mob, etc., and you'll see the title. So if you're not anywhere in Warsaw where you can get the magazine, you can actually flip through the magazine electronically. And if you look in the front part of the magazine where you usually would look, you will find an email you can write to the editor. I'm not going to say it in the video because then we're just going to get botted to death. If you're going to bot me, make an effort, go to the corners, look in the magazine. You might find something that you like in the stories. But anyway, we have gotten some letters, or I have gotten some letters. I'm going to skip over some of them, like the ones from like relatives and things like that. But let's see, the first letter. This kind of made me laugh. I'm not laughing at the guy. I'm just saying that I'll tell you why in a minute. But from Georgie F. From Bulgaria, I assume, because he wrote, I have noticed that you are once again negative picking Bulgaria. I think he means picking on Bulgaria, just like you once did in your other publication. He's talking about the CE Cheat Sheet and Crime Report, which is like a newsletter, whatever, backstory, you don't need it. You should be negative picking Poland if that's where you live. Okay, or you should be negative picking, let's just say picking on the United States, not just Bulgaria. You know, Georgie, I know, I think you're using a different name. I know who this is because I don't know who this is, but I used to get constant letters from someone from Bulgaria. It wasn't Georgie, but I think it's the same guy. I think it's the same guy, Georgie. You can use your other alias if you want. Look, you know what? You're right. I should pick on the United States. I will pick on the United States, and I'm going to pick, I've told you this before, I'm going to pick on everyone. I'll pick on Poland too. And I'm not even picking on Bulgaria. What Georgie is referring to, because some of you are like, what is he talking about? In the corners, we've got a couple of really good stories on Bulgaria, Bulgarian politics, the appearance of suddenly out of nowhere, a dead Bulgarian mafia figure. Get in the magazine, take a look at it. It's just true crime, man, in politics. It doesn't matter what country I write about when it comes to politics. It's probably not going to be positive. That's just politics. True crime, the same thing. I'm not picking on you. Go through, if actually in the three things, I'm sticking on this. Georgie's gotten to me. He's made me nervous. If you go to the politics in brief, and you go to the crime, spy, intrigue, man, there's all kinds of stuff in all different countries. I even go through the countries, starting with Albania, you know, going all through Serbia, whatever, Romania. They're all in there. I'm telling you, they're all in there. Now, next letter. This one's interesting. The summoning of ambassadors. What is it? Peace saw in their polls that they would benefit from more tough positions towards Ukraine in the upcoming elections. Did they pre-agree everything with the Ukrainian side, taking into account how quickly the Ukrainian response arrived and what came next? Interesting if there are any insights. This is from OD in Ukraine. That's a great question. Do I have any inside information? Because you're suggesting a little bit of conspiracy here that, you know, the Poles knew they worked together and maybe they were generating press. That's how I understand it. I don't have any insight there. I don't really think that's the case. The emotions seemed pretty sincere. And if you watch the previous episode where we had Ray Wojcik, who a retired American colonel, he mentioned, look, I mean, the Ukrainians are under a tremendous amount of stress. But to tell you the truth, the Poles are too. I think that it's difficult if you don't live here in Poland, or let's say if you don't live in Lithuania, or you don't live in Latvia or Estonia. The Russian threat seems a zillion miles away for like almost everyone else, although maybe not for Romania, because we'll get into that later. When you live in Poland, though, and I'm counting myself, I've been here a long time. Right, been here a long time, naturalized Pole. When you live in Poland and you understand the history and you see what's happening, you go back to World War II, and I don't want to sit here and make every Russian a villain. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about, though, is when the war machines start rumbling, people get nervous and they get upset. And the Poles were pointing. They were saying, look, this is going to happen. Some Ukrainians were saying this. In the Baltics, they were saying there is going to be a war. I read it. There was a tremendous article out there. I'm not sure if it was New York Times or someone pointed out that if you went back not too long, I think it was 2007, the Ukrainians were pointing to Kazakhstan and saying, you see what's going on there. I mean, Georgia, sorry, not Kazakhstan, Georgia. What's going on there is going to happen in Ukraine. There is, a threat level, a worry level, which has obviously been a bit amplified by the Wagners in Belarus, if you want to take that super seriously, if you just want to see them as a nuisance. But I think there are heightened emotions on both sides. Certainly there are in Ukraine. I cannot imagine the pressure that the president of Ukraine is under on a daily basis. Now, what I kind of expected to happen after the ambassadors were summoned, one ambassador was summoned the other, but it must be, like I said last week, it must be really tough to be an ambassador, right? You get summoned to, I guess, get told off. I've always wondered what those meetings really look like. You show up and they go, and you get told off, or you stand in the corner. I'm not really sure what happens there, but it must not be a lot of fun. But kind of as predicted, it's sort of like went silent. I think both countries realize that there are bigger problems, bigger issues at stake. Now, with regard to what you said about peace, for those of you who are not from the region or not from Poland, the Law and Justice Party, which has been basically in charge for years and years since they defeated the party in the opposition, or one of the parties in the opposition, now Civic Platform. Law and Justice has been heavily criticized, let's go ahead and tell you that, for a long time with regard to judicial reform, all kinds of things. But I could sit here, I could be an apologist for Law and Justice. I don't agree with everything they do, but I think that, we tend to be very hard on the reigning government. I could be pretty critical, to tell you the truth. I really could. But let's not, I'm going to try not to be critical, not to foul my own nest for at least a day. But peace, did they see their polls and think they would benefit from a tougher position towards Ukraine? Maybe a little bit they did. Now, I don't want to say anybody is, not idealistic and cynical in politics, but we do have to take into account that in Poland, there's a large portion of the constituents who vote for peace, who are older, who are in Eastern Poland. And I lived in Eastern Poland when I first came to Poland. I've been in Poland a long time, 30 years now. And I heard the stories too about what happened after World War II, and it was vicious and it was not pretty. And on the Ukrainian side, sometimes you get the feeling they don't want to own up to that. On the Polish side, they remember the things that happened. Now, I'm certainly not going to try to make villains of the Ukrainians, but I'm saying this is something that is in the minds of that older constituency who maybe were children, or they were told by their parents or grandparents about what happened at the end of the war when you got into some of the issues on the border, right? And those are real issues. I don't think we should pretend like they're not. Now, the other side of it is you have a constituency which peace at least seems to believe will vote for them when it comes to immigration in general, because they've talked about this referendum on the theme of immigration to the EU. Now, this is going back, of course, to the flood of immigrants from Africa, from the Middle East, etc. And we do a whole show on this. I don't actually agree with anyone, except one thing I do agree with is that immigration should be legal. People should get visas, and then they should become naturalized. So that I think there actually should be a process. I don't believe in just open borders. Now I said that, I'm going to get called I don't know what I'm called. They're going to say, he's from Texas, we told you. Well, I am from Texas. But I also, when I came to Poland, I did things legally. I got my paperwork done. It was a pain in the butt. Trust me, it was a pain in the butt. And in the end, I managed to get through it. And when I came to this region, I didn't have any money. I had a little bit more than $800. That's all I had. So nobody start telling me it was easy because it was rich. But do peace see potentially that they should at least look like they're being tougher on Ukraine? It's an argument. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I would suspect that, yeah, maybe so. Maybe they do. You do what you do to get votes. I have seen parties in Poland and in other countries drastically change over the years, including the opposition, which has become much more, if you ask me, socialist in Poland than what it used to be, to the point that I can't really tell that much of a difference between their economic policies. That's just, we're coming up on elections. Things are going to get tough. And this party wants to remain in charge. Keeping that in mind, though, to be the devil's advocate, and this is what I get at when I say that let's not make villains of anybody. Let's not make villains of peace either, because let's take a look at what's happened before and since the Ukrainian war started. There is one country that kept going to bat for the Ukrainians and calling for sanctions. And yeah, that's Poland, and it's also peace, and it's also Prime Minister Morawiecki. So I think, to make a very long answer, to cut it short, and I'm sure that this answer probably pissed everyone off. I'm a specialist at that. Piss everyone off. Even Evgeny, the cameraman's pissed now. And yeah. He's giving me dirty looks too, I think. I'll piss you off if you watch this program, I know. But I think that what we should say happened last week were heightened emotions. The grain deal is tough. The Black Sea, the end of the Black Sea deal is tough, and the way the Russians are behaving there is tough. It's just very, very difficult. And since it's kind of gone quiet since then, I think we're going to move past it, just like I'm doing now. I'm sure I probably got myself in a whole lot of trouble already. Now, there was also one more letter. I saw it. I know I saw it. I had it. Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay. I think you meant the Black Sea, not the Baltic in your last show. Yeah, Henrik P. Yes, I did. Henrik P. I did. Oh, it's not even the Henrik P. It's not the Henrik P. that I interviewed last week. It's another Henrik P. That's pretty funny. It's really not him. Now, I know. You're not even the only one that told me this. When I was talking about the Black Sea deal, for a second, I said, once I said the Baltic. I need a vacation, that's why. Sorry about that. Man, you guys, when you watch the show, you pay attention. I'll give you that. And finally, from Ian C., The mag was great. Holiday reading. Get that Twitter up. I had to at least read one positive one. He's talking about this mag, The Corners. And yes, we are on Twitter. I got to do more tweeting, or we're on X. What's it? Is it called X or Twitter? Or it's X now, right?
Yes.
It's X. Evgeny says it's X. I need to use it more. My monster staff is going to post things on Twitter. We'll see. Now, I have a couple other things to announce before we get into the three things. With The Corners, if you notice, The Corners is not all, and some of you say, well, what is The Corners about? Well, digging up the dirt, the lowdown, the grime, and the diamonds in sea. It's not all about nastiness and crime and all the true crime and that kind of stuff, although a little bit is. If you get towards the end, there are some positive things to be in this, that are in The Corners and on the website, and we're putting up new material all the time, especially me. But not only me, we actually had a guest columnist, Roman Basilikov, he's actually in Canada, a Ukrainian born detective in Canada, wrote a column this week. We've got other guys that are posting all the time. But one thing that I'm announcing for the Friday Fiction contest. If you've noticed, there's been a Friday Fiction piece up every Friday, and that was written by yours truly. And it was already published. It was published in an anthology, and I think I have the rights to it. I hope I do. But we're going to have a fiction contest, and if you send in your piece, works of fiction, they can be short, they can be long, up to like 50 pages. We're going to take a look at them, and in about 2 months, I'll actually put the rules of the contest and everything up. You may win. You might be the winner, and you'll get a big prize. Won't be that big a prize, but you will be published. But in the meantime, if you submit works of fiction, I may just put them up anyway on Fridays, and we've got one coming this week. It's a short one. It's from Jonathan Roy. Yeah, I'm using your name already, Jonathan. That's going to be up this Friday. And I tell you the truth, the only thing I'm going to tell you is that I'm not going to try to steal the rights from you or anything. It's just you're going to have the rights. I'll have to have some rights to put it up on The Corners. But this is something that I'm really into, and I'm really impressed with what I've already read by Jonathan Roy. So if you are an aspiring fiction author and you're looking for a place to get published, send it to me. Send it to me. Now, that's enough of an introduction. How many minutes was that? I think, oh man, it was like 10 minutes. I'm sure it felt like eons, centuries. But let's get into the first thing. Alexei Navalny, and this is serious. Now for the first thing, the first subject of today's show, Alexei Navalny. Now, I'm going to assume that anyone watching the show has at least heard the name Navalny, and if you're familiar with the region, you are going to know who this man is, or at least you'll have an idea of who he is, in the sense being the most effective, the longest surviving big name among opposition groups in modern Russia. And let me tell you, his story is something else. But what we're not going to do, and this is kind of my promise to you at The Corners, I'm not going to sugarcoat things. We're going to talk about, everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the reality of who Navalny is, for example, because if you don't, then things come back to bite, and the accomplishments of someone like this are actually undermined later. So let's talk a little bit about him, and then we're going to talk about what happened this week, which is why it's relevant, because he was sentenced to 19 years in a special prison regime in Russia, and that's an additional sentence, but we're going to get to that in a minute. Now, if you want to talk about who he is, about who Navalny is, I guess I could sum that up without going through all the details. His mom and dad own a basket weaving factory. They were running that since like the 1990s. As a young guy, he got educated. He became a lawyer. He actually went to Yale for something. Then he got a job at some of the top companies in Russia. And along the way, he became disgusted with what he saw in Russia, kind of the kleptomania. And that is really where he has been coming from the start. Not putting up with the corruption, not putting up with what he saw was unfair, unequal representation of the populace. But yes, you have to admit, Navalny was not a saint. Now, I'm going to jump to this. The reason I'm jumping to this, don't assume that I'm trying to knock this guy down when obviously he's in a bad way. What I want to do is just what I was saying. We're going to put the picture out there, put the facts out there, and then we can discuss the actual, the entire story. Because if you type in Navalny's name, one, there'll be zillions of articles. Some articles will be about him exposing corruption. Others will be about him being poisoned. You might have heard that, but other articles would come out and say that he was a racist, he doesn't like immigrants, he was an extremist, etc. The real articles, these are not, I'm not talking about just some mindless blogs or anything like that. One of the articles that will show up, this is what I want to talk to you about, is that he, if you get past, the side of him, the freedom fighter side or the pro-democracy side, if you typed in his name, you might come up with articles about, for example, a couple of years ago, Amnesty International withdrew Navalny from its list of prisoners of conscience. And the reason why it did that, while he was serving that were admittedly, Amnesty International at the time would tell you that there were trumped up charges against him. Things that he said as a young man, as a young politician, we're talking about going all the way back to say 2007, they weren't pretty. They just weren't. In one case, he referred to immigrants as cockroaches. He was seen as extremely, we're not talking just anti-immigration, we're talking about extremely, didn't want him, didn't like him, etc., etc. However, what he didn't do was say that any acts of violence should be should be carried out against him. So let's just get that part straight. Now, after this Amnesty International article, this declaration came out that he was removed, not too long after that, in May in 2021, Amnesty International came out and they made a statement that said, following a careful examination of his case, they actually put him back onto the list of prisoners of conscience. Now, you're always going to get kind of the skeptics say, oh, look at this, these are, games and the elite playing games and people supporting him, et cetera, et cetera. At the time, Amnesty International said that when it came to his personal opinions and behavior, that was one thing, but his plight as having basically been wronged by very controversial court decisions and thrown in prison, that was another thing. Okay, let's take one more step back to this. One more step back. When Navalny was, before he was taken off the list, one of the reasons why he was taken off the list was because Amnesty International at the time was bombarded with complaints that he was on the list. This was later deemed that it was probably organized by the Russian government itself. It was almost like a bot attack, that they were just they were hit with these complaints with copies of a video that he made where in the statements he made, they were not pretty. But when you really drill down into it, and when you look at what's happened since then, and since his various battles, which we're also going to talk about, trying to start a political party, trying to run for mayor, trying to run for the president, over time, and although this is a little bit speculation because we haven't actually ever seen him come out and renounce everything. He kind of has, kind of hasn't. But over time, it seems like these views have been modified or somewhat been at least a little bit not as extreme. But I'm not sure if they were ever as extreme as they sounded. Now, the language was ugly. There was no doubt about that. But one thing that he kept harping on was saying, look, immigration, you have to get your visa. You have to become, move here legally. How many times have we heard that? We've heard that in a lot of countries, in a lot of states. It depends on what country you're in. If I'm back in Texas and I say that, then a different political party, I'm not even aligned with the political party, but if I say that in one fashion, I might be accused of being racist or bigoted. If I say it in another fashion, I might be, people might deem me as being sensible. My own personal view is, yeah, I do believe that if you're an immigrant or a refugee, you try to do it the right way, try to get your paperwork sorted, etc. Because over the long term, that's the best thing for you as well. And before you say, hey, well, you have it easy because you're originally from the States, whatever. And when I showed up in this region, I had $800, so nobody lectured me on that. But that's my own opinion. You may not agree with it. Navalny's opinion, I never shared Navalny's opinion in the sense that I never agreed with his use of language and some of the things he said. To tell you the truth, and I'll divulge a little secret here. I remember years ago when I encountered someone who was from Navalny's team. And to tell you the truth, at the time, I already knew about some of the things he said. And I did not see him as the man that he has become. And I was not impressed with what I'd seen. You know, it's almost a lesson for young people with the internet. You know, don't put something out there, don't write something, don't say something, because it's going to stick around. But now let's move to the present, more to the present. We have seen over time how these views have been augmented, and he's even stated, I believe he stated this in an interview with Adam Michnik, who was one of the founders of Gazeta Wyborcza, one of the long-running Polish newspapers here, that you've got to communicate with nationalists. You've got to communicate them in a way that they understand. So he seems to have been implying that, look, saying that people have to get visas, saying that people have to get legal, there's nothing wrong with that. When it comes to the statements he made way back in the past, when he was asked about these, he said, leave it up. It's historical fact. Leave it up. I said it. I'm not going to try to hide it. And there's something to say about that. Now let's move back to the future. Let's talk about what's going on with this case and how this really is incredible, unbelievably wrong. 19 years. Now, I mentioned the things he said, the old history, the rough start, and I know that this is a strange way to introduce someone who I'm sure you can already tell I have some admiration for, but just hang with me, hang with me. I do think he's moderated his views, but just listen, hear me out. But let's go back to when he starts getting into politics. 2006, he decided he wanted to have a 2006 Russian march, okay? Well, as you can tell, that sounds pretty nationalistic, although at the time he said he wasn't going to have anything that's going to be, you know, racial or overly, overly xenophobic. But actually, the Yabloko party that he was hooked up with, they didn't see it that way, and that's exactly why they kicked him out of the party. So he's getting off to a rough start in his political career. In 2007, he quits the post of the party, but tell you the truth, they kind of already kicked him out. But that wasn't the end of it. That wasn't it. He decided to co-found the National Russian Liberation Movement, which, again, one of the things that this was based on was anti-immigration. So he's still getting off to a rough start. But he starts pushing forward based on the fact that he cannot stomach the theft, the kleptocracy, which is, you know, what they coined it. They coined it years ago in Russia instead of the bureaucracy, the kleptocracy. And he starts pushing forward and uniting Russians that were disgusted with this. Now, it's easy to go back and point at Russia. To tell you the truth, I went to Russia, I think, for the first time in '93, somewhere around there. I went to Russia a few times since. I've been in a lot of countries in the region. All the countries that went through this transition came out of communism and went to the West. To tell you the truth, the way it worked is you had companies being privatized. You had the people who already had money, which a lot of times were the communists, had an advantage. The secret services had advantages. The police had advantages. And there was a lot of theft by the very people who supposedly should have been looking after the general population. So I can understand the rage that was going on there. Well, by 2011, he's already pushing the envelope. He's making accusations of electoral fraud. He's having protests. He's actually starting to become a problem for the Russians. Now, in December of that year, they throw him in jail. It's funny, at the time, the pro-government press, they even came out and said, you know, this is a mistake because you've taken a guy who was kind of just an internet savvy type of person at that time, or that's the direction he was going to go, and you made him into a real like real life on the ground martyr. Well, he gets released, and you think, man, you go to Russian jail. Actually, I had a couple of friends that went to Russian jails. Some of the stories they told you are, in hindsight, pretty hilarious. I never went to a Russian jail. Hope I never wind up in a Russian jail, but it does not sound pleasant. As soon as he gets out of the Russian jail, he called on Russians to unite against Putin. Now, you got to remember, this was, Putin now, if you want to say he's looking older, he's looking frail, his hold on the country is a bit more shaky. That's arguable. That time, man, that was not the way, that's not how it looked. He calls on Russians to unite against Putin. He leads a demonstration of 50,000 people at least. What do you think happens to him after that? Well, he gets thrown in jail again. He went to jail quite a few times. Prosecutors searched his home. I'm going to have to look at the notes here because there's so many things that I'll get lost. Then he said, you know what? We're not beating the system this way. What we're going to do is we're coming out with something we're going to call like e-democracy and figure out a way to actually beat the system and to get more votes, even if we're, basically being oppressed. This guy was not going to back down, Well, he keeps, basically calling out the government, and whether or not you want to say it was the government, he starts being physically attacked. At one point, he gets sprayed in the face with a green dye that like burned his eye and left him like 80% blind in one eye. That doesn't matter. He's going to run for office. Now he runs for mayor, and you almost have to wonder. This was actually back in 2012, 2013. You almost have to wonder if they'd left him alone. Maybe he would have become mayor. And at that time, since this was a few years after some of these more nationalistic statements and these more xenophobic statements, maybe if he became mayor, maybe he would have cleaned up the Moscow mayor's office. Maybe he would have made other statements. Sometimes when people achieve one level of office, they never go any further because how many politicians have sunk under the weight of trying to run a city? At any rate, he tries to run for mayor, and even though there were all kinds of shenanigans, even though it was probably not a completely fair election, no, he probably did not win. But you know what? That's not going to stop him. He decides he's going to keep running. He's going to try to take it to the next level, and he's going to try to run for president. Now, this was 2018-ish, because that's when he actually announced that he was going to run for president in 2016. Well, then things start to get tough. He winds up jailed again. They ruled that he's ruled that his right to a fair trial was violated, but then this was overturned. He was constantly in and out of trouble. As I already mentioned, he was sprayed in the face with a green dye in 2017. This probably severely damaged. It was a chemical burn in his right eye. Well, then he gets out of jail in July 2017 after he spent 25 days in jail then. And then prior to that, he was also arrested, and he spent 30 days in jail for organizing illegal protests. Not going to stop him. Then it turns out that they harass him. They're trying to keep him from running any kind of campaign because Human Rights Watch, they actually highlighted what he's going through. He's sentenced to 20 more days in jail in 2017. Then he's barred in December 2017 for running for president because he was convicted for corruption. So what does he do? Is he done? Has he had enough of getting thrown in jail and being convicted on probable bogus charges? I mean, it's not like I was there and saw the evidence that was put against him, or if there wasn't evidence. Nope. He files an appeal, and he leads protests to boycott the elections. Well, what happens? They have the Moscow City Duma election, and of course he's not going to be able to run it, but he supports the local candidates. And then what happens? He comes down with, this is in 2019, comes down with an allergy. Well, it's almost certain that he was poisoned again, and it was another chemical attack. And when the doctor looked at him, they didn't really actually say that's what it is, but then they later said, oh, it probably is the result of some type of chemicals. And now we get to 2020, when he fell ill on a flight from Tomsk to Moscow. Now, this you can read about this. This was Novichok. This was the same nerve agent that they hit Skripal with. It sounds like it was horribly painful in the sense that he collapsed screaming on the plane. They knew there was something wrong. Later, he said he wasn't screaming from pain, but he realized that he was going to die. Now, they went at first in the airport. They very quickly reacted, probably saved his life. He wound up flown to Germany. He was in a coma. The Germans saved him. They identified the agent that had been used against him. And interestingly, Bellingcat actually outed the agents who were involved with it. But then Navalny himself prank called the Secret Service, the FSB, and then he basically caught them on tape, pretty much admitting what happened. The agent was put into his clothes, into his underwear, and a guy admitted that if the airport crews hadn't reacted so quickly, then he probably would have died. Now, for most guys, now even if you're dedicated, you've been through a lot. You've been hit with now chemical agents 3 times. Apparently, they'd had him under surveillance anyway for like 3 years. It's clear that they want you dead. It's clear that it's going to be very difficult to actually run in any kind of fair election in Russia at that time. And there are, don't return to Russia. No. He returns to Russia. What does he do when he returns to Russia? It's kind of amazing, to be honest. I'm not laughing. I'm just astounded. He returns to Russia and immediately starts to reveal the wealth of Putin himself. And he basically puts out there that he's got this massive, it's not a villa, it's not even like an estate. It's almost like a state within a state, where you've got, of course, you got your mansion, but you've also got, everything else that comes with it, including a no-fly zone. Kind of amazing. No, this guy was not going to stop. Now, eventually, to make a long and very difficult story short, when he comes back to Russia, he's arrested. Why is he arrested? He's arrested for basically violating his parole. Now, I don't know how you violate your parole when you're in a coma and you get flown to another country where there are specialists that can save you from a nerve agent, chemical poisoning. But he came back. That's what he got accused of. And then he was put in prison. You know it. We know it. In first, looked like it was going to be 2 years in prison, but then he got hit with further charges, and more years were added to the subject. And then finally, now on August 4th, he was hit with 19 years in prison. And the interesting thing there is that actually the prosecutor was going for 20 years. So I guess he failed at his job. He only got 19 years. And now Navalny's going to be put into this extreme prison regime, which by all accounts, it did shake him up. It would shake up anyone. It would shake up anyone. But what's interesting is, and this is finally where I'm going, you've got someone who's not a perfect person. You've got someone who said things in the past that are deplorable. But you also have someone who stuck to his guns, and he has fought against corruption, against basically what he deems to be an unfair system of government. And this man has not given up. Now, you're not going to be hearing from him as often as we have in the past, because they're going to limit his contact with the outside world, his ability to communicate, write letters, etc. But one of the things he said is really quite interesting. And I'm going to read this to you. The first statement, which I'll just sum up, was that, yeah, I understand, just like with other political dissidents, the number of years is not what matters. They're just going to keep me here forever or until this government is over. But then he said something else which really is poignant. He said that he's not mad even at Putin. But I'm going to read this to you. This is what he said. Although I sometimes am unable to stand it, I want to shout at some judge. Samoilov is actually what he says. It is not him that I hate with my enormous hatred, and it's not the cops, thieves from the colony, and not the FSB officers who command them, and you will be surprised not even Putin. At such moments, I hate those whom I loved, whom I defended, for whom I argued horse, and I hate myself for having once loved them. Therefore, there's nothing I can do about this. I fiercely, madly hate those who sold, drank away, squandered the historical chance that our country had in the early 90s. Okay, this came from, it came from The Guardian, I believe. That's where that quote came from. Got to give him credit. What is he talking about? He's talking about something that basically so many of us deal in so many different countries. You might hate the president. That's what you think. You might think that you hate the president or the governor, whatever. But look at the machinery, the apparatus that put that guy there. And in Russia, just like in many other countries in the region, there was this elite apparatus, especially in Russia, in our region, that had all of the advantages. And instead of trying to make these states a better place or this world a better place, they did what they could to take the money and run. And yeah, that's why they've got super yachts. That's why they've got, villas or practically castles in southern France. That's why they have, they bought sports teams in different countries. And you know what? Before we actually look at them and accuse them of anything, hey man, we have a whole offshore banking system that worked all over the world. And KYC, that was a joke. Man, I just got to say, flawed as he is still standing there in prison, still making statements like that, and he doesn't look like he's going to break. And this is the last thing I'm going to add on when it comes to Navalny. The Russians now have a problem. They can't kill him because he's already won. If you kill him, he becomes a martyr, and he really wins. Nobody's going to forget that. They can't actually mistreat him any more than what they've done because he still stands up. They don't want him to get sick because if he gets sick and dies, obviously we know whose fault it is. In a way, Navalny's already won. He's won. Behold the man. That's all I have to say. Flawed as he is, behold the man. And now for the second thing. And again, I shouldn't be calling people things. I shouldn't be calling, but I'm going to introduce Mike Houlehan. We've known each other quite a long time. Mike is the founder of Aspen Aid, aspenaid.org, if you want to check it out on the internet, and you should. Aspen Aid, and I actually kind of I misintroduced how you guys got involved. I'm going to let you fix that, how you got involved in Ukraine. But their organization has been very active in providing supplies and actual, all kinds of things in between. I'm going to let Mike do the talking, but Mike actually just got back from Ukraine. And one of the interesting things that he told me just right off the bat is that the narrative, the media narrative, and what's going on there and what he saw there, and you were at the front even in different places, is a bit different than what appears in the press and the papers. So I want to get into that. But first, tell us a little bit about Aspen Aid and how it got started. And from what I understand, you guys already had an eye on this region, but you got moving very, very quickly once the invasion happened.
Yes, in a nutshell, it's like you said, we've known each other, and I know a lot of people from having been in Poland a long time.
Yeah.
And so I had a resource base in Poland, and having lived here, knowing the area, and not just Poland, but Ukraine, Kaliningrad,
Right.
Central Europe. And we were predisposed already with the buildup from 2014 and the awareness after an airliner was shot down,
Right.
and realistically nothing happened.
Right.
And if you lived here, you were aware of events, the Maidan, et cetera, going
Sure.
on in Ukraine. So with that predisposed awareness, then 24th of February happened.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, it's kind of sort of a 9/11 moment, to put
Right.
an American thing, to say, what are we going to do? Having been here and knowing people like you and a lot of professionals in the community, from embassy to corporate, et cetera,
Right.
called and said, what should we should we come over and what can we do? Two, the response I got was, no, you could probably set up an agile resource because Aspen's got the influence,
Right.
funds, people like that, the influence. And so we did.
And so an agile
yeah.
resource, define that.
What
Because not everybody's going to know what that means.
An agile just means if you think like the Red Cross, the UN, and
Right.
people, the time factors that can be involved are something everybody's aware. Like if we do, what can we do now?
Right.
And so we set up Aspen as a tactical NGO,
Mhm.
which is that we very, very much focus on having an objective and then getting it done as quickly as possible.
Okay, and so, but I understand you immediately started working with the fire departments, or how did this happen?
That was I was at the small rally for Ukraine, like a lot of places were doing in the States in March.
Yeah.
And it was just a rally for Ukraine, and there were the kind of GoFundMe we're going to send help, whatever. But I went with the fire chief, and at that point, they had been contacted.
Like the Aspen, Colorado fire chief.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aspen Fire.
All right.
And Aspen Fire has some pretty strong relationships, which we won't go into here, like with New York Fire from 9/11 and things like that.
Okay.
And they had been contacted along with Clifton, New Jersey, and other fire departments, and we're working with the National Fire Service straws here in Poland to get some things like bunker gear, immediate traumatic, immediate impact gear on a ship as quickly as possible because everything had to go to Gdynia. Everybody knew it, but they, in Colorado, had no idea how to do it.
Right. They know where Gdynia was.
So they basically said, the chief said, "Hey, Mike, I know you've been in Poland. Would you give us a hand? Could you do it?" And I said, "Sure."
Yeah.
And the only thing I didn't know was all that was going to happen on Tuesday, the following week, and this was a Thursday. And when he told me that, I to this day don't know how we managed to get all this gear out.
So what did you? What was the gear? Because you say bunker gear and
that would be in the fire department parlance. That would be your helmets, gloves. By the way, gloves are ultra important, especially in the environment there.
Right.
Things I learned going along the way.
Yeah.
Boots, axe.
Axes.
One of the things, that's really critical is having done cable and satellite television in Poland. When we saw some of these buildings, the missiles hitting them, these buildings, you wouldn't recognize them in the States, but some, like in Gdynia, could be up to half a kilometer long, these massive Soviet blocks.
Right.
And so from that, it became really apparent that what are called jaws of life, most people, I think, know them from, they can split
from
cars
car
and
accidents,
things like that.
Yeah.
So these rescue extraction tools became immediately apparent to someone like me because I've been there, but even though I wasn't a fire professional. And so I mentioned that to our chief, and then that just sort of exploded.
Right.
Because it became a critical item, expensive item, hard to get, literally not on the ground, and still realistically not on the ground in Ukraine.
Right.
And we put that as a separate initiative.
Right.
And what happened with that is we learned about a Ukrainian diaspora, things we never know about until an event like this happens.
Sure.
In
Alberta, you don't even
Alberta,
know they're around you, right?
No.
And then you find out that there's,
So the fire chief in Aspen hooks us up with people in New Orleans and blah, blah, blah. And from that kind of chain reaction, we end up working with our now #1 firefighting partner, which is called Firefighters Aid Ukraine, out of Edmonton in Alberta in Canada.
Right.
And through that, we got from the city of Calgary, they were switching or upgrading their Jaws of Life equipment from hydraulic to electronic. They ended up donating all 36.
The 36 hydraulic ones.
And they went over in November, including then 2 firefighters from Edmonton to help train. Because you got the difference in metrics and pressures and all that. And so that firefighter led to a real first responder initiative.
Right.
And I was telling you earlier, for people with the back, we run Aspen kind of like a boutique investment bank. And by that, it simply means we don't go out trying to raise money for hats and T-shirts and whatever. We start with demand items that have been verified and vetted by the state emergency services in Ukraine, by partners in Ukraine. And we have very specific, trusted, and super vetted partners. And that's what's led to first firefighter, then working with sheriff police.
Right.
And then we've expanded into prosthetics and other things.
Okay, now well, tell me this though, but you just spent 7 weeks, is that right?
Yep.
7 weeks in Ukraine just now. Okay, the first question is, why did you go? And the second question is, what are your observations? Because I understand you weren't just in Kiev. You went to the front in certain places in Zaporizhia, or where did? And tell me where you went. And okay.
This trip was actually the second trip this year.
Okay.
And the first trip was realistically scouting, getting to know the territory, vetting potential partners, meeting demand.
Right.
This trip, and also that was very time constrained.
Yeah.
So this trip, I said, don't make the mistake of always having to feel like you had to go, but instead kind of did the one-way ticket, and secondly, knew exactly who we were meeting.
Right.
Knew that we had from the mayor in Rivne to the state emergency services chief in, which is same as like the fire chief in Lviv, Khmelnytsky, Odessa.
Right.
And so we're in a lot of places around the country.
Right.
And
well, what was your impression there of what you saw? Because what we see, and actually, I tend to be more pessimistic and cynical.
I've heard.
So is everybody. But actually, last week, we had a retired colonel from the U.S. military, Ray Wojcik, on, and he was basically, he was far more optimistic than I expected when it came to the progress of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. When it came to the time necessary for it. And the points I made were, okay, well, you don't have the air support that you would need. You don't have the thing that everyone, like you just watch movies in the States, you need a 3-to-1 advantage to that kind of thing. But then he was saying, no, he was actually more optimistic. And this actually kind of didn't match this constant narrative than we even saw over the last, say, 7 days of articles coming out in different publications that had sources in the U.S. military saying they're not happy or the progress isn't going anywhere, the losses are too extreme, etc. What is your response to that? I mean, you were at at the front, and where exactly?
I actually got the benefit this morning of having watched that episode with Colonel Wojcik.
Ray Wojcik. Yeah.
Ray Wojcik. And I was really pleased to hear his more optimistic tone because I share it.
Right.
And one thing that happened is when I occasionally get the English language news in Ukraine, the narrative was just the counteroffensive isn't stalled, it's not going well, etc.
Yeah.
I'm going to share with you from, we work with the military, with state emergency services, etc. One, the morale. If anything, the unity of the country, not just in the military, has improved and gotten more determined. It's what I would call almost professionalized, and it's gotten more competent in the assessment. It's not just rah, kind of unity. It's serious unity. So I would call the morale excellent. I would call the biggest stress element is the 18 to 60 issue about males not being able to cross the border. It's a real issue there because I have friends, and it's very common. He hasn't seen his daughter since a year or so ago, and she's having birthdays over Zoom. They can't cross the border. The conscription is an issue that you might say the exhaustion of volunteers and the war going on is real.
Well, we did see this week that President Zelensky came out and he fired. The heads of the conscription services, accusing them basically of being corrupt or dishonest, or it didn't get into a lot of details there. But I can imagine. I mean, for as long as I've been in this region, there have been, and it doesn't matter what country you name, young guys that got out of military service through corruption. That's how they did it. And that is kind of what was implied by firing these officials. So, you could only assume that there is an issue there.
I would say definitely there's an issue. I can't say I know anything behind the scenes, but my personal take was he had, the strength to do it now. Because it's been an issue like any other country, like you said. But what I kind of took it is he actually has the support and the strength to make a move like that.
Right.
And in it might have been the Wall Street Journal something a while ago. They call it the Monaco Brigade or the Monaco Battalion.
Yeah.
And when I was there in February and March, I heard about in essence, a lot of muddied people, some in Warsaw, in Monaco, that's where the name comes from. But now it's kind of reached a more serious level of the awareness that people are escaping the duty and other people are actually performing.
Right. So the wealthy, the more elite are getting out.
Connected.
And the connected people, they manage to avoid it or get out of the country. And it kind of leaves the burden on the less fortunate or the less.
But kind of going to your kind of lead in. What I thought is the morale is strong.
Right.
The people that we know personally and like when we've gone to places like Kherson and what have you.
Yeah.
The unit cohesion it's excellent from my personal vantage.
Cohesion, right,
there is a frustration with sort of the drip, drip, drip approach of gear and equipment.
Weapons, equipment.
So, for example, when I came back and hear the narrative of like, oh my God, they haven't done a land grab. The stalling of the
they haven't made enough progress, and
So, in a non-military person perspective, when you go up there and you see the effect, and one of the things we deal with is soldiers that have been severely disabled by initially. It was like in February and March, it was like from Mariupol and things like that.
Yeah.
Now it was 80% landmines and civilians landmines.
Right.
And so the view of is it stalled? I'm not quite sure that the Ukrainians would take that view because the trenches and the digging in and the cluster bomb, et cetera, effect of the Russians was in part because we didn't provide some of the gear they've been asking for all along.
Right.
And so Colonel Wojciech yesterday brought up the Warthogs, the A-10.
Yeah.
And that is something we kept hearing about nonstop from actually not just Ukrainian military, because we can't really share. And when you look at the digging in, it's kind of like a World War II front. Like we literally know volunteers making candles. It's like World War I volunteers for the front, for the soldiers.
The front, for the trenches, for life in the trenches. Yeah.
I think the perspective of what's going on the Kerch Bridge is much more significant. The logistics for the Russians is primarily dependent on rail.
Right.
And so if you look beyond the front and things that we may not be hearing about.
Well, so the Kerch Bridge, the Henishek Bridge, hitting those various bridges that are going to,
And there's a lot of indications that, and I kind of go back to the morale. The troops that you meet that are actually rotating more than they'd like because of this war just continuing.
Yeah.
And the morale and the strategic and tactical impact that they've had and know they've had and we do hear about is positive. And so I have a much more optimistic view than what I heard that everything's stalled.
Right. Well, one last question then. You were at the front, and again, I'm not sure exactly. You mentioned that where you were, it was much more like it was like a desert or apocalyptic, or tell me a little about.
The front's long. I think it's like 1,100 kilometers, going up there. And so my personal issue, we were with parties that wanted to take us, for example, to some villages. And I've just been with disabled soldiers working on a prosthetic program, and I'm hypersensitive on the landmine issue. So that was a big issue. And one of the things that
you were just, to put it simply, you were worried about stepping on a landmine.
I was worried about stepping on a landmine, right?
Yeah.
And so it was that was sort of what was primarily on my mind going that direction.
Right.
We went to Kherson, and then we had just come from Odessa, which had the largest impact. Have you heard about the cathedral getting hit? It was 5 straight days of, in a sense, the front sort of moved there, and then we went to the actual front. And it was interesting dynamic because it's very dry. That I didn't expect. It was very dry along from Mykolaiv, which is a shipbuilding city, then up to the one thing that really hits is the checkpoints then are much more almost like border control to get into Kherson. But the when we actually were going in the villages, I think one of the big things that it was just the air, the dryness, and the nonstop shelling, because you're hearing, boom, 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 and it's pretty much both incoming and outgoing.
Right.
There's these blue tarps that are on the villages, and that's where people are living, and that's the first thing you're kind of going, wow, there's a lot of people living in some serious, like I was saying, it felt like a Mad Max, those old movies sort of.
Yeah.
And the people that just in a very kind of a stone cold, weird sort of shell shock
With
state.
the blue tarps, they're living under tarps, yeah, because their homes have been destroyed.
Right, they don't have.
And when you said the shelling, you hear it all the time. Are you talking about distant shelling, or where you were? Was
it's fairly close, and it's bizarre how in a abnormal environment how you adjust so quickly on normal. And the thing that really hit, besides just seeing the blue tarps, was all the houses that had no tarps whatsoever, with families and people living in them.
Even though they were destroyed, they were missing roofs or walls or whatever, people just living in them.
While we were there, somebody comes out and there was some unexploded ordnance in there, that a child had picked up, things like that.
Right.
And in Kherson, it's no longer occupied, but one of the places we went, the geolocation is what they assume happened on some humanitarian, and two ladies lost their life just before we got there, 2 days before that. And so
they were targeted intentionally by
they believe it was intentionally targeted.
Right.
And that one's strange because the city is much cleaner than when you saw a couple months ago. The trash is picked up, but there's no people, and the businesses are closed. So it's just this surreal environment where we were like the only traffic, and then maybe one person on a bicycle.
Right.
And yet people are living there. But you do hear nonstop. In fact, I think it was yesterday, one of the hospitals we went by did get hit. Yeah, and so the definition of the front is not necessarily just trenches and what have you. It's a long, disparate set of kind of.
So even when you're miles away from the front, there's villages that they're hearing this constant artillery and getting hit.
Well, you heard about Kupiansk. I mean, these people are living at the front too.
Right.
I mean, it's amazing that where people are living. Yeah.
Right. And so, last question then, because you were there for 7 weeks and you were just constantly hearing this artillery, constantly seeing this stuff. Obviously, there's a huge need for supplies and for aid. Although, when you look at kind of the world, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about where we are in Poland right now or the States, whatever, there does seem to be kind of aid fatigue. I know that some of the work that I do to try to get aid, it's harder now. People.
Oh yeah, there is definitely a fatigue. Yeah.
Do you think this is because in the West that people aren't seeing this, or they've seen too much of it, or they're seeing a different type? They're seeing that, hey, the Ukrainians can't win this narrative that you don't agree with. Where's this coming from, or is it just people denying the money?
I think it's kind of all the above.
Right.
To be frank.
Right.
Like coming back to Warsaw right now, just talking to people I know, and there's a fatigue of Ukrainians that are in country, and sort of they've overstayed their welcome to some people.
Right.
And but to those Ukrainians, they also can't believe that they're still here. And
they thought they would go.
I call it future shock. They're not sure where they're going. It's everything. And so, for example, on funding, I know some of the people helping on food and deliveries and what have you. And it's you have inflation for the average person around Europe and the United States.
Yeah.
So their pocketbooks are going down.
Yeah.
You have the media element that's sort of in some points going, oh, this is not positive and it's sort of hopeless, but then it switches channels and goes to the politics of the day. So you have just
You just get like a flash of what's
it's a
going.
whole, However, I would say, just to correct you, we only heard the shelling like that when we were at the actual area of the front.
Yeah.
So like in Lviv, it's so vibrant there. And when you actually go, it's the summer and great feeling can also be really deceiving on the mental aspect for people living. So if you have some people that show up just for 3 or 4 days and they might hear sirens, that is
it sort of fools,
there's a fall like it's not so bad. I heard that happened when the African leaders went to Kyiv.
Yeah.
And they were saying that, and I could kind of relate because sometimes you're there and you're going, wow, this is actually a beautiful city.
Yeah.
And it's great until it's not.
Right.
And then the 7 weeks kind of went because of things you end up realizing just how much is on the average person's mind there.
Right.
So what is the future? Their financial problems, the family separation.
Right.
Everybody knows somebody the rotations to the actual front are in every family. There's funerals.
That's traumatic just in itself.
Every city I went to, because I went to a lot, Rivne, Kyiv, Lviv, Khmelnytskyi, Kremenets, a lot. And there's funerals every day. Yeah. And you also kind of can't get the local thing unless you're there for a while. Yeah. Because that really impacted me. Sorry, I got something in my throat. Impacted me when you see just the amount of actual casualties that are having funerals, but then the other casualties, which is one of the things we deal with the initiative on prosthetics and what have you.
The injured
and I think you touched on it. I know the Wall Street Journal just did about an article. Yeah. The volume of people that are losing limbs is World War II or World War I scale.
It's World War I
insane.
Scale. Yeah. It is. Okay, look, I appreciate you coming by. That is illuminating, and good on you for the work you're doing. If you guys have not heard of AspenAid, hit aspenaid.org, get to know it. Also hit thecorners.pl, but under the YouTube video, I'm going to put more information on AspenAid and also on what we talked about last week, which is the Christian Joy Foundation, because we have a food drive coming up September 1st, and if you want to get involved with that, well, I hope you do. I hope you do. And after this, we've still got one more thing to go, so stick with this. The third thing, which is going to be the roundup of what is going on the different parts of the front in Ukraine. Now for thing 3, yes, we're going to do a Ukrainian war update. We're going to talk about the battlefield points. I'm going to keep doing these. But there are a lot of other things to talk about in the corners, and we've kind of, like I said, we focused a lot on the war in Ukraine, but I'm going to keep doing the Ukrainian war updates every week. Although next week, I promise that we're going to get into some of the true crime and some of the issues, for example, the surveillance, how does that work, why do you use it, etc. Just thought I'd tell you that. But now let's get into what has been going on this week in the war. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on this is because I do believe that we're in a critical number of weeks in the war. Now, as you already heard when we talked to Mike, on the ground, the kind of the unity and the cohesion when it comes to the actual outlook of the soldiers and that they believe they can win and they're dedicated to winning. Impressive stuff. But what I want to do is I'm just going to go through some of the news points and what we believe is happening because it is not always clear. Now, first of all, you may have heard just what Mike alluded to in the second part of our show, in the second thing. He talked about how key the bridges are, and what we have seen over this week is an increased number of drone attacks on various bridges, including the Kerch Bridge, which at first they thought maybe it had been hit, maybe destroyed. It may have just been like a smoke screen that the Russians put up because they were afraid of sea drones. It doesn't look like it's been destroyed at all, but there was another attempt to hit it. The Kongar Bridge, or the Chongar Bridge, sometimes I'm gonna pronounce things as the way we do in Polish. The Henichesk Bridge, they're hitting these different bridges because it's going to choke off supplies to Crimea and further north. And it looks like maybe there is they're already seeing the results, because what we are hearing is that even when something is not badly damaged, there are huge traffic jams. The military is having trouble, the Russian military is having trouble routing their supplies. They've got, there are civilians that are trying to get out, or even maybe still trying to get in. This tactic is ongoing, and there are more and more of these drones. And even what's interesting, I saw an article that Ukraine has apparently started an entire home industry that is kind of mimicking the Shahed Iranian drones. So none of this is going to slow down at all. But what I'm going to do, because I know that some of my viewers who have gotten in touch have said they want to know about the battlefield results, what are happening in different parts of the front. Now, I do go through that stuff. We put that stuff up on the corners every week on the website, but I'm going to go through it here, and we're going to put up maps and leave the maps up so you won't see my face. We're going to leave the maps up so you can get a better idea of what we are talking about. But I'm going to go north to south. In the north is where I still see the most concerning news, and that's on the Kupiansk front. Now, I did mention this last week, and I do think that it's getting tougher there. We know that over the past few days, when you're up in Kupiansk and you take a look at this map, you'll see there's a town, Kupiansk, and there were evacuations. They were evacuating civilians. We knew there was a buildup ahead of time. We knew the Russians were coming in that direction. And what it looks like right now is that the Russians are pushing, again, from Liman Pershi, but it's not just from Liman Pershi. It's not just one, coming down on the map. You can see coming down from the northeast. It's actually, if you take a look at that map, and you see Liman Pershi is up at the top, and you go all the way down to where you see where Yahidny is, down towards the bottom, and Pishchane. If you go from there, so Liman Pershi, Shinkivka, all the way down to Pishchane, you can pretty much say the Russians are coming from multiple directions, and the Ukrainians are under pressure. Now, the Ukrainians made a statement, and the statement was that despite the attacks on Kupiansk, that the Russians have not gained a tactical advantage. And basically, they're saying that the Russians, that they really haven't gotten anywhere there. This came from a Euromaidan press tweet. I'll read it exactly. Despite the Russian effort to carry out assaults near Kupiansk, Kharkiv Oblast, the Russian forces don't even have a tactical level success in the area. Okay, the issue is going to be if the Russians actually do take Kupiansk. And you can see that. So if they're going from the middle towards Petropavlivka, if they get past that and they hit Kupiansk, and we expect there's going to be quite a battle there, if they took it, well, then they are going to have a tactical success. So the odds are that we're looking at quite a difficult time, and a sharp battle is building up. And I think that we're going to see Kupiansk is going to be a key battle in the very near future. We do know the Ukrainians are Russian reinforcements there. There are some who have debated that maybe the assaults further south by the Ukrainians have slowed down because they're diverting resources. Don't have any idea if that is true. But let's actually go a little bit further south. Let's go to Bakhmut. Now, if you take a look at the map on Bakhmut, you're going to see again that maybe not that much has changed, but there is interesting news from that sector. Now, as we've repeated in the past, north of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians have not had as much success, and it does not look like much has changed there. And I'm talking about Vysedivka. Hasn't gotten that, but if you take a look at the southern part of Bakhmut, where in Kashivka and Andriivka, where we were hearing that the Ukrainians were having successes, that maybe they were even taking parts of Kashivka, it also looks like that has slowed down, and they're dealing with Russian counterattacks. This does not mean that they've lost ground. It doesn't mean that we should be pessimistic about this, but it doesn't look like that is going forward as quickly as maybe many of us had hoped. Now, Staromayorsk, the reports are interesting. Now, if you take a look at the map, if you're looking at Staromayorsk, you don't see it on this map that I'm putting up because it's. But if you go to just to your right, if you're looking at the map, or actually this would be kind of toward the east, kind of maybe the southeast of Staromayorsk, you've got Urozhaine, and it looks like this has fallen to the Ukrainians. Now, there have been reports, just so that we don't, we don't want to deny what some of the Russian bloggers are saying, because sometimes they actually are right on the money. There have been reports that first the Ukrainians took part of Urozhaine, and then the Russians took it back, and then they held it. But we actually think that the Ukrainians made progress there, that they pushed very hard. They hit it from various directions, and that it's very likely that they made progress there. Now, actually, what is also interesting is that to the west of Staromayorsk, they've sort of increased their gains in that part, and so this looks like it's becoming a success. What we talked about before, when they jumped past Staromayorsk, we never heard anything more about that. So it looks as if there have been some gains. We don't want to get too excited about them, but it looks like the Ukrainians are actually making some headway there. Now, if we're going to jump to Zaporizhzhia, to Robotnia, this has been a very talked about topic in the press this week. It's been one of the highlights that the Ukrainians are actually making progress there. And if you take a look, you can see on this map that they have made some progress there. They've recaptured some territories. There's been some funny comments that have come out to say that they've taken part of the city that they didn't have, when we're like, well, we thought they had it. But again, this is one of these questions where it looks like once you actually take a settlement or a village or a small town, there's nothing left in the middle. You can't sit there because you just get bombarded by either side. Whoever takes part of a settlement, they get into that destroyed wasteland, and they are just sitting ducks. Now, it is true that the Russians have claimed that they have Robotnia, but at the same time, we're hearing that the Ukrainians have made progress there, and that they're driving potentially towards Verbove. It looks like this is going to be a key part of the front. Now, but let's get to something that's actually quite interesting, which I alluded to in the update, which you can find on www.thecorners.pl. And this is this Dnipro bridgehead. We're talking about Kozachi Laheri. Actually, if I look at that, I would probably say Kozachi Laheri, but Kozachi Laheri. And this is, if you take a look at this map, and you can see this area, which is highlighted, which looks like it's possibly a Ukrainian bridgehead. Now, a bridgehead may be an exaggeration of what it actually is, but if you look at those islands, you see the river, the Dnipro River, and you see these little islands. From what we understand, the Ukrainian special forces have taken control of those islands, and that they've been getting across and forming something of a bridgehead or raids. The suspicion is that they get hit very, very hard by attack helicopters, by artillery once they're there, but they are making some progress. And if you take a look at kind of the bigger map, you will see, which I already mentioned also, you will see how valuable this could become, in the sense that it's a shorter run towards Crimea, and they can cut off supplies and also cut off Black Sea access. This may be one of the key moves that we're going to see, which is already happening even now when it comes to what is going on to the Ukrainian front. And it may be why there is a sense of optimism that maybe is not seen just in the standard international press. Now, that's all I have when it comes to the Ukrainian roundup. All we can do is wait and see, but I do believe that these next few weeks are critical. And one last thing I will add, when it comes to this Kozachi Laheri, this Dnipro crossing, there was an interesting comment by a U.S. think tank. Forgive me if I don't actually remember the name. I read it, but it's not coming to me. But they basically said that this bridgehead could be very vulnerable to a mechanized attack. I'll put the attribution in the notes. Sorry, I can't remember actually. It might be the College of War or the Institute of War think tank, but I'll make sure and put it in there. But they say that this bridgehead could be very vulnerable to a mechanized attack on the side of the Russians. But it may be that the Russians do not have the capabilities in that area. This may well be true. This is an extremely interesting point. Out of all the fronts, I would say the most interesting points right now, not actually denigrating or trying to take away the progress of or the valor of what's going on in Staromayorsky or in around Bakhmut, but up in Kupiansk, what the Russians are doing, and down actually where you've got Kozachi Laheri and this Dnipro bridgehead. Both of these could be critical over the next couple of weeks. Well, that's it. That's all. This is Preston Smith with the Corners. Just a couple of final thoughts. Like and subscribe. You will keep us on the air. I hope you've got something out of it. If you want to know how to comment on the stories, the comments, the guests, but be nice. Be nice to the guests. If you want to know how to comment, what do? You get on www.thecorners.pl. You open the magazine, the virtual magazine. Actually, you can even get in touch with us and subscribe, and we will sell you the magazine. We'll send it to you. But you get on the website, open up the magazine, flip it open, and you can find, I guarantee you're smart enough inside the magazine to find the email address where you can write directly to me. I will check those, and we will answer your letters on the air. No, I'm not going to say it on the website because I don't want it on the video, because I don't want to get botted to death, swatting away those bots. That's how I feel when that happens. I've already got some anyway. But otherwise, over and out. Tune in, subscribe, like, tell your friends. For those of you fighting in Ukraine, hang in there. For those of you civilians that are in need, hang in there. God be with you. And I'm going to put down, for anyone who's watching this, who wants to donate, who wants to help, who wants to get behind aid for Ukraine. This is non-military aid. This is food, supplies. I'm going to put down some contact information in the notes, and there'll be more on that moving forward in the future. And also don't forget the fiction writing contest. That's also going to you. Otherwise, over and out. Good to talk to you. Good to talk at you. I hope that's not how you felt. Do widzenia, na sklenedo. That's in Czech. And see you.